Okay, so where we left off was looking at the history of geography. Now, as I said before, it stems back to the Egyptian, Chinese, and Phoenician period. Now, from the standpoint of collection and observation of geography, it really takes place in the form of communication, and that communication is in documentations and observations of surroundings, but really it takes place in the documentation of maps. Maps are one of the most earliest forms of geography as a means of communicating what people are seeing around them and how to express and explain directions. So we see some early cartographic evidence in the forms of clay tablets stemming back to 2300 BC. Now, these are Babylonian clay tablets that we actually see on the left, the physical tablet that you see on the left, and the more interpretation of what this tablet was explaining. You know, you can look at this tablet without the interpretation on the right, and it looks like some patterns, it's like a symbol of some sort. But that symbol, when analyzed, was really a map showing different realms that existed during that time. So you had a center city that showed the extension and distances of where other areas were at and located. So it was a very early form of a cartographic representation of Babylonia. And so very interesting piece of evidence that physical geography existed millions of years ago. So when we look back at the history of geography, we need to talk about founding geographers. Now, the first one is Herodotus, and he wrote volumes of textbooks and documents describing humans and physical geography. Okay. The second one we've probably heard of before is Aristotle. Aristotle is known for demonstrating that the Earth was a sphere. Okay, and all of these early geographers, they weren't just geographers; they were astronomers, they were chemists, they were physicists, and all of those elements combined to being geographers. The next one is Eratosthenes, and Eratosthenes is is credited for calculating the equatorial circumference of the Earth based on observations from shadows and distances of those shadows that were cast on the surface of the Earth. And Eratosthenes was taking information that was coming in. He was actually a librarian in Alexandria, and he was taking these observations of the sun and where the sun is at certain periods of time. So he was able to make these calculations based on observations. Strabo was also credited for producing 7 volumes of material that documented geography. Okay, so again, these are great observers. They would take in stories from travelers and put them together in one big record of information. And then we have Ptolemy. Ptolemy provided the concept of latitude and longitude before it was even a reality that existed. He was one of the first to add the latitude and longitude lines on a map. And as we will talk about in this class, latitude was somewhat of a known concept because it could be determined based on stars and observations, but longitude was much more difficult. So Ptolemy's first map, as you see here, we see a grid-like element of latitude lines. Latitude lines run horizontally. Okay, they run from west to east, but they delineate north and south. And longitude lines run straight up and down, north and south, but they delineate between west and east. Okay, so this grid-like system allowed for more precise mapping. So when we talk about geography, okay, and you being a budding new geography, possibly major or minor, or just a human on the Earth's surface that likes geography, we know that geography encompasses a lot. There's one aspect of geography that's human geography that looks at human phenomenons on the Earth. And if you are interested in human geography of cultures and migration, Um, a physics or a cultural geography class or a human geography class is maybe what you would want to take. This class would focus on culture, social theory, um, politics, and urban, why we have towns where we have towns, why do they exist. You also may be interested in migrations and demographics, why people live where they do, and why do they move from one place to another. What is that push pull system that takes place? And this is all the elements that contribute to human geography. Now, as opposed to physical geography, physical geography, as you know, we're looking at physical phenomenons on Earth. Okay, and these physical phenomena refers to as our weather, our water, our rocks, earthquakes, natural disasters. All of these elements fit into physical geography. More specifically, climate and weather. And I was so happy that many of you mentioned that you wanted to learn more about climate and weather because trust me, you are. So that's great. Also, plants and animals. Physical geography encompasses all of the ologies: the geology, the meteorology, the climatology, the biology, and botany, zoology into one. Landforms. We also look at geomorphology. We'll talk about how certain mountains are created, how we can build them up, and how we can tear them down. And this is referring to mass wasting. We also talk about soils, soil science, and soils as a whole as it relates to plants and water. And we will also talk about hydrology. Now, because we have two lists here, one looking at cultural geography and one looking at physical geography, doesn't mean that these two lists can't interact with each other. Now, one thing that I would like you to think about is try to think about one element that could not relate to the next. It's pretty hard to do. You think about weather and climate, and we can immediately draw a line to migration. Okay, we know people migrate due to changes in weather. Maybe it's not fitting for them, or maybe they have crop failures due to long-term climate change. And as a result, we see a migration. So now you see the connection between the two lists here. Let's do another one. How about where we see landforms? Okay, geomorphology. We know that certain areas around the world have different landforms, and I'm going to use the example of Norway. That's a lot of my expertise and exposure came from. So Norway has one of the most different dialects. There's over 50 different dialects of the Norwegian language. Now, dialects meaning could be accents. Okay, so different style of speaking Norwegian. Now, these different styles of Norwegian, these dialects, stem from the fact that Norway is a country that has many mountains that separates different groups of people. Okay, so this is more of a kind of a cultural thing where all of these different villages and towns stemmed, in Norway, but they developed their own type of language or dialect as a result of the physical landscape. So we see we can draw a line from cultural all the way down to landforms. The same can be done for hydrology, where there's plenty of water, okay, potable water, drinkable water, and where we have urban settlements. Or even we can go in the opposite direction, places like Las Vegas and LA that grew and went through this whole population boom based on the fact that there was access to the Colorado River. And forecasts and predictions for the Colorado River was done based on the idea that population wouldn't grow much. And now population has boomed in both places, and both of these towns are located in the desert. And so there's some major issues that are taking place here that are requiring folks to look at the cultural aspect, the urban layout, political issues that result in where we place our cities and how we use natural resources such as water. So this great interaction back and forth amongst the two. So here's another diagram that looks at the subdisciplines of cultural geography, which is now on your right, versus physical geography, which is on your left. Now, again, for the purpose of this class, we will be looking at all of the ologies on the left, but we will definitely talk about implementations and issues that exist when we start talking about physical elements and bringing in humans into the nature of it. Now, when we talk about physical geography, and this is something to write in your notes, please do not pay attention to the chapters. I pulled this from a different textbook. This is actually from the Christopherson textbook, so you may see it if you bought that physical textbook. Now, regardless of whatever textbook this came out of, this is fundamental knowledge about physical geography, that there's 4 spheres that we will be talking about all semester. And I've outlined lectures to take place of these spheres. Now, I want you to understand that these spheres are the atmosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, and the biosphere. So any concept that we will talk about will fall under these 4 spheres. So if you were asked on a quiz, perhaps this weekly quiz, which of the following is part of the 4 spheres, you should be able to list out atmosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. Now, what exists under the atmosphere? Well, the atmosphere, obviously, this is where we experience sun energy. Okay, this is where we have the fundamental layers of our atmosphere. This is where we have weather. Weather exists. But really, the important thing is the sun's energy. How we're getting the energy from the sun. How is that sun energy reflected back out and getting trapped in all the different layers of the atmosphere, allowing us to live here on Earth? The second sphere is the lithosphere. Lithosphere, meaning the Earth atmosphere interface that takes place. So we have the atmosphere, the lithosphere, that's interfacing with the atmosphere. Okay, so that takes place in the form of erosion. Also takes place in looking at rock type, looking at earthquakes, looking at volcanoes. So the lithosphere is looking at the layers of the Earth, and we have this kind of boundary of interface that exists with the atmosphere. We also have the hydrosphere. Now, the hydrosphere encompasses topics such as water, weather, and climate systems. Okay, and we will be talking about that at great lengths throughout the semester. The next sphere is the biosphere. This is where we talk about why plants live where they do and really incorporate climate, weather, and all of these elements that we're talking about here. So why soils are the way they are based on lithosphere. So a lot of great things that we will be talking about. And notice the arrows on the diagram, that everything is interconnected. So we will be, even though I will be dividing out our lectures talking specifically about the atmosphere, know that the atmosphere interacts with the lithosphere. The atmosphere interacts with the biomes and biosphere. The atmosphere interacts with the hydrosphere. Okay, so we all have this two-way connection between the two. Now, in talking about geography as a whole, okay, so past geographers that I mentioned, Eratosthenes, Aristotle, Ptolemy, now all of these past geographers and current geographers require the use of fieldwork and observations. Okay, this fieldwork could be in the form of taking a survey, could take the form of going out and mapping elements, and looking at and experiencing the complexities that exist of whatever you're mapping. So there is a very attractive field component when we talk about physical geography. And I wanted to provide you, this is me out in the field. This was my second year in Alaska. And we were out in the Revelation Mountains surveying. And the Revelation Mountains is north of Lake Clark, one of the national parks. And it was an area where there was just no people. We took float planes in, and we traveled every day in helicopters. And you know, the field experience was amazing. You know, being in the field. If you look in the background there, you can see a glacier up that ravine. You can see the toe of the glacier. It looks pretty dirty. Up towards the head of the glacier, we see some nice thick ice. But look at the vegetation. In the background, it looks like, you know, Sound of Music, rolling hills. No way. We could hardly walk in that vegetation. It was not tundra that you would expect. It was alders and willows. Very hard to maneuver and explore in this particular area. So we're coming to the end of our 15-minute time slot. We'll have one more 15 minutes component for this week's lecture. And I'll pick up from here for the next